This is not about you doing right or wrong. This is really about you having the knowledge to make a choice.
Welcome to the Be Well podcast, wellness backed by science, bringing you inspiring conversations to help you on your wellness journey to a healthier, happier you. Brought to you by Breast Cancer UK. You can start your personal prevention journey right now by taking our prevention quiz. Just click on the link in the show notes. Hello and welcome to the Be Well podcast. I'm Thalie Martini, CEO of Breast Cancer UK. Now today I'm really looking forward to speaking to an Associate Professor of Epidemiology at Columbia University in the US, whose research focus is on exploring how exposure to chemicals during important periods of physical development, such as in the womb or during puberty or after pregnancy, can have an impact on our risk of developing breast cancer. Now her research also looks at how these exposures can impact on pubertal development and also when puberty might happen. And this also plays a part in breast cancer risk. And my guest's research and her expertise is of huge value to us at Breast Cancer UK because the research that we fund is entirely focused on understanding the environmental causes of breast cancer. So we naturally are really, really keen to learn about her findings. Now, there's so much to talk about today, but I'm also really keen to hear about her work looking at populations who are at higher risk of breast cancer or have a higher risk of breast cancer mortality. For example, Black and other ethnic minority women and young women, looking quite particularly at cosmetics and hair products. So my guest is also passionate about education and awareness raising to empower people, particularly women of colour, to reduce their exposures to harmful chemicals. And this is another area for us that's of great interest because of our education program as well that we are looking to expand. So we were also really fortunate to have my guest present at our Breast Cancer UK Prevention Conference in summer 2025. So there's a lot to discuss and to find out about my incredible guest. Now it's time to hear from her. I'm so pleased to welcome Jasmine McDonald to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jasmine.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for that amazing introduction. It was wonderful meeting you earlier this year as well.
Yes, it really was. Well, I'd like to start actually with your profession. You're an Associate Professor of Epidemiology at Columbia University, which is in New York. And for those of us who really don't know too much about this, can you explain exactly what life course epidemiology means?
Yes, so life course epidemiology, by definition, is the study of long-term effects of later health or disease. But it's the disease risk of like physical or social or environmental exposures that happen during gestation, childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, or even all the way up into later adulthood. So you can imagine it's the study of all the lived experiences and the lived exposures that we go through, everything from preconception all the way into later life.
Wow, that is fascinating. It's a huge period. And what was it about this discipline that attracted you to it?
Honestly, the first thing that attracted me to it is the idea that there are these periods of time where while you're studying the life course, moments where being exposed physically or emotionally, socially, environmentally would have larger effects. And I was really interested when I had my first child that, that postpartum window was a period of time where if I was exposed to something that was harmful, may have a bigger impact on my health than in other periods of time. We call these critical windows of susceptibility.
Yeah, amazing. And actually, that's my next question, really. And that's if you could explain to us what those critical windows of susceptibility are. It's a very well established concept, and it's. I suppose I touched on it briefly when I talked about in the womb and so on, but you can kind of expand on that. But also, when in a life is a woman most vulnerable, and how can chemicals impact on that woman's health during those life stages?
Yeah, so my specialty is in breast cancer. And so when we think about critical windows of susceptibility for breast cancer, we think about those windows of time where the breast cells are highly proliferative. What that means is they're dividing a lot. They're dividing a lot and they're dividing fast. And that is especially during pubertal time. So when a child is going from, having no breast to developing a mature breast, it's the time period after and during pregnancy when your breast is getting ready for lactation, or when you finish lactation, you have to go back to your breast being in a near pre-pregnancy state. All of this takes a lot of cell division. Anytime you have a high amount of cell division, you have greater chance for that cell to get a damage that gets replicated for the rest of your life. And if that damage is a bad damage, such that it is something that makes a rogue protein or makes your cells even divide even faster, or it's a mutation of some sort, or it changes the way your cells translate what it's supposed to do, that can cause problems in later life.
Right. Okay. And this was a topic really that you covered at our breast cancer prevention conference earlier on in 25. And just by the by, your presentation was one of the highest rated ones by our delegates at the conference. So congratulations. You gave us some amazing insights. I think people walked away thinking, well, not only was that incredible insight and really useful, but probably quite worrying as well. But can you talk to us about some of the things that you covered in that talk? You talked about first menstrual periods, as well as how breast development itself can impact on breast cancer risk.
Yes. So when we think about menstruation, it could be like a barometer for health, because the earlier you start your first menses, the higher your risk of other diseases, which also includes breast cancer. So the earlier age, we usually set a benchmark of having your first menstrual cycle before the age of 12 is associated with an increased risk of breast cancer. And that's because you started menstruating earlier, which now allows you to start menstruating longer in life. And the longer you're menstruating in life, that's more estrogen that's being cycled through. And so the same concept comes with earlier breast development. So the earlier you develop breasts, that's also been associated with the increased risk of breast cancer. And it's the idea that now you have this new bolus of estrogen that's constantly cycling through, and you have a longer period of time of that happening. Estrogen is naturally something that promotes cell turnover, cell growth, it's proliferative, and we know that estrogen is really important for breast cancer risk.
Right. So basically exposure to that estrogen from an early age is what can start to increase risk.
Right.
But, the other discussion is around the fact that there seems to be a global, well, let's say, decrease in first, the start, when a girl starts her period, that her age is going down generally globally. So
Yes.
what do you understand about what's behind that?
Well, there's been a lot of different studies where the primary agent is obesity. They're saying that early childhood obesity is driving that early age of menstruation and early age of breast development. But that can't be the whole story, because it's a global experience. And not every nation has this childhood obesity epidemic like the United States experienced. Another idea, which I think is very also valid, is with economic growth comes better nutrition, less infection. And when you have less energy that needs to go into clearing an infection or just surviving to the next day, you can put more energy into your growth and development. The idea is that a woman has to live long enough to reproduce. That means that you can't die of an infection. You're not going to have a child if you're malnourished, because then that child won't be produced. And so the life history theory is that you can't have it all. And so if you have like high nutrition and economic development, and you're not worried about clearing malaria or any other type of disease, then you can place that energy into growth and development. That's another reason. Other reasons are that there's something going on in our environment. And honestly, I don't think there's one reason. I think that it's a perfect storm of things that are happening globally, where we're being exposed to many different things, and there's rapid economic development as well. And when you combine these things together, you're going to get this earlier puberty. My biggest concern is that some groups are going through puberty at age 5. Yeah, so like if you look at the data within the United States for African American girls, Black girls, you can see breast development as early as age 5.
Wow. Okay. We'll get on to that topic in a minute, because actually, it's very interesting to start to dig into some of the conditions, I suppose, that might be leading to these phenomena. But one of the really important aspects of our research at Breast Cancer UK, which really aligns with the work you do, is how we research the impact of EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals, which we know affect our hormone system in a number of complex ways, and in doing so may actually increase our breast cancer risk. So I suppose there's a couple of things I'd like to ask you. Firstly, for the benefit of our audience, if you could give us a bit of an explanation around what endocrine disrupting chemicals are, and then maybe talk us through some of the culprits that we're concerned about and that you've looked at in your studies.
Yes, so endocrine disruptor chemicals are some of those exposures that I'm talking about that are chemical exposures. Endocrine disrupting chemicals do just as they say. They disrupt your natural hormonal system. So you can imagine that endocrine and hormone are synonyms of each other. You have your natural rhythm that's endogenous, that's inside of you. But once you start introducing exogenous hormone things that are mimicking your hormones, then you're going to have problems. And the reason being is that these endocrine disruptors are going to be mimicking your own hormones, and either that's going to cause greater proliferation or cell division. There's been shown, for example, there's endocrine disruptors like phthalates or parabens. These are things that are found in a lot of personal care products. They've been shown to make the cells divide even faster. So you can imagine if you're already in a sensitive window of time, let's say you're going through puberty where your cells are constantly dividing, but you're also being exposed to these outside endocrine disruptor chemicals. Now you're really having your cells start to divide. You also have the issue that it can cause changes in the way your DNA is read. It doesn't change your DNA, but what I say is called epigenetic modification. And so what this means and what these chemicals have been shown to do is, for example, the best example I have is my middle name. So my middle name, when I was born, was Alise with an accent on the E. So I was Jasmine Alise. Then I had a different birth certificate when my parents got married, and they forgot to add the accent on the E. So then I became Jasmine Elise. Same DNA, same me, but how I present my name has now changed. And that's what epigenetic modification is. It's like putting that accent on the E or taking the accent off. It changes the interpretation. And we know that these endocrine disruptor chemicals can also do that. Now, I'm still the same me, but I also have an angry mom who did not name me Jasmine Elise. So you can just imagine this happening numerous times when you are going through this rapid period of development, and then you introduce this exogenous or outside endocrine disruptor.
That's a brilliant analogy because it is so difficult to explain that. But yeah, it makes so much sense when you put it that way. Absolutely. Yes. So the thing about exposure to these chemicals, you mentioned phthalates, you mentioned parabens, but there are so many more and they are so complex. And where are they? You said, okay, personal care products, but, where generally are we finding these chemicals?
Well, you can think of, so phthalates, when I said personal care products, if you see the word parfum on a bottle, that's typically phthalates. Those are considered like low molecular weight phthalates, but there's also these phthalates that are called high molecular weight phthalates. And these are commonly found in plastics. They're even found in IV tubing, like hospital IV tubing, which Breast Cancer Prevention Partners is working to campaign to get DEHP, this high molecular weight phthalate, out of the IV bags, because you can imagine if you're in NICU or going through chemo, you don't want this exogenous exposure. But they're not, like, people don't put it in there saying like, oh, we're trying to harm the population. They put it in there because it makes the plastic more pliable. It makes your hair able to be more flexible. And then parabens is what goes into products for preservation. So it prolongs the shelf life. So if you've ever made like your own hair oil or made your own like curly shampoo or something like that, you usually don't put a preservative in it. Like, you have to use it pretty fast or it'll go moldy. Things that are usually on our shelf when we go to the store, those sometimes have parabens in them to prolong that shelf life. So that's where phthalates and parabens are. But we also find that people will put estrogen in products to promote hair growth. When you think about pots and pans, if you're using those black utensils to stir your hot soup, you're pretty much also flavoring it with plastic. Thankfully, it doesn't have a very like strong taste, but you don't want to introduce these chemicals, but we often do it without even knowing that we're doing it.
We take it so much for granted because these are all convenient products, and if something, I think about my daughters, and hair growth is quite important for them. So if something promises to help your hair grow faster, they're going to go for it. And so there's there's that real seduction with a lot of these products without kind of a real education around what's in them and how they might be harmful. But actually, could reducing exposure, particularly early in life, could that mean that we actually reduce our risk of developing serious disease such as breast cancer, in your view?
In my view, yes. I will say that, this is a complex issue, but if you are considering what could you do as an individual, there's things you can't control. You can't necessarily control where you live and the air pollution that's in that location. You can't necessarily control if you have fresh produce in your neighborhood or your neighborhood's walkable. There's certain things like you can't structurally do anything about. I consider you being knowledgeable of the choices of what you bring into your home is something you can have control over. And so in my mind, if you can start that control, whenever you do, and then if you teach your next generation that same type of awareness, then you are going to be reducing exposure. And some people think like, oh, okay, well, like I just put on this perfume like once in the morning. But if you've done doing that once in the morning for the past 10 years, you've been constantly dosing yourself. One of the largest concerns we have is that it's not just that one dose, it's that chronic life course, long-term, cumulative exposure. If you're going to lotion your body every day, why not choose a lotion that's a little less toxic? Because that's something that you're dosing yourself with constantly. And we know that when it comes to some of these chemicals like phthalates, they pretty much metabolize, which means like break down really fast. So there's been studies, including ours, to show you can see a change if you change your product, you can see a decrease if you change it to a cleaner product within as little as 3 days.
Amazing. Well, actually, that's really interesting because that also leads me to starting to dig a little bit into your specific studies, the ones that focus on specific demographics and how some of the groups that you've worked with, particularly women of colour, are at higher risk of exposure of these potentially harmful chemicals. So the first question is, why is that the case? Why and how are women of colour facing this unequal burden of exposure, first of all? And I know that your context is quite specific to the US, but generally speaking, in your experience, why is it?
Well, I will say that the reason why I don't think is just for the US. I think that globally, there's this Eurocentric view of beauty where it is a lighter skin. It's longer hair that's straight. I think that that's in India. I think that's in parts of Africa. I think that's in Europe. I think that is what we have put in society as standard beauty. Because of that, those who may not meet that standard will use products that are chemically laden to give that. If you're not light enough, you may use skin lighteners, and often skin lighteners have metals. Metals are carcinogenic, meaning they can cause cancer. You're putting it on your skin on a regular basis to lighten yourself to a viewpoint that is not valid. The other thing is for hair. Maybe this is not also universal to just the United States, but there's periods of time where you can't be in a workplace with cornrows or braids or afro or things of that nature. I remember when I was working at a very nice mid to high end small store. And there was a young woman who was in college on a track scholarship. So she worked as well as did track, which means that when she came to work, she had her hair in cornrows because she had to do track, and it's a very rigorous, sweaty, and it's the best way to protect your hair. She only worked in the stock room. They pretty much saw her on camera at corporate and said, it does not matter where she works in the store, she is not allowed to wear cornrows. And she was let go. She wasn't going to sacrifice her track scholarship by trying to keep this Euro view to work in a stock room. But that's really reality.
It's incredible. And I suppose that reality will have an impact on others who hear about it and will influence some of the choices that they make as well.
Yeah, and she was very young, had, was trying to just make it through, had gotten a great scholarship, wasn't enough to just live off of, gotten a job, was always on time, never late, great worker, pretty much just got let go because they didn't like her hair. And these are things that women face. And that's why perms and relaxers are marketed to those with very coily hair. You talk about hair textures being like 4C, 4B. It just means like how coily your hair is. And so there's perms and relaxers marketed to them. There's Brazilian blowouts. There's keratin treatments. The thing about it is when you use a perm or relaxer, it literally breaks the chemical bonds in your hair. Like breaks the strongest bonds in like chemistry irreversibly. And so if you can imagine putting that on your hair as a Black woman to straighten it every 6 to 8 weeks, and you can't stop doing that because when your new hair grows in, you have to blend it with your permed hair. So you're putting this on your hair for 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes for 10, 20 years. And some kids are getting this done at like as early as age 5 because their hair is too thick to work with or unmanageable, or they need to look neat when they go to school. So I can go on and on, but the fact of the matter is that, the industry knows what the standard of beauty is, and they market to that standard.
Yeah, and they're it's obviously a multi-million dollar industry. And I suppose that the other information is about how they marketed these products. Obviously, they're marketed to kind of have the desired effect. But what about awareness around what these products can do in terms of their impact on people's health? Do you think people are aware?
I do not. I do think that the market does bend towards consumer demands, so that if we as consumers start demanding better, we'll get better. One example is you can't go to any store now and not see a product that says paraben free, phthalate free, not tested on animals, like the things that people have raised awareness of, that the formulation makers for these products have changed. So if you think about baby bottles had BPA. Now, if you buy anything that's for children, you'll see BPA free, BPS free, free of this and that. And so in my opinion, the market is driven by what people ask for. Unfortunately, people still are biased towards a certain standard of beauty and a certain standard of universal acceptance. And that's hard. Like, for example, the taking stock study that was done where Ami Zoda is one of the authors. They looked at, when it comes to personal care routines, what do women of color most bend towards? And they saw that like Asian women more likely bought facial products, like cleansing products, whereas Black women more likely bought hair products and menstrual products. And so, they know the market. Black women are I think they spend like $5 billion or something like that on like hair products a year. So they're the biggest marketer. But unless we change our view of beauty, then that market is going to be a large share of products that are not safe for us.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really difficult one that neither you and I can influence too much, is how we change that view of beauty. And how social change happens and who the key influencers are. I mean, I suppose one thing that's really evident in the US and to some extent in Europe is that when it comes to manufacturers, say, changing what's in their products, in the US in particular, it's often very grassroots, isn't it? It's very demand-led. It's not regulatory-led, because the regulatory system in the US around chemicals is pretty frightening, isn't it? Insofar as there's very little regulation, isn't there? And
I mean, it's awful.
yeah, and so the onus is entirely on the consumer to say, I'm not happy with this product. Let's pressure these manufacturers, and the manufacturers are only driven by an economic argument, against continuing to produce these, but if there's still an economic reason to do it, i.e. fashion, and what influences what people want, then we're not going to resolve the problem. In terms of the regulatory system in the States, for example, and there's lots of issues to work on in the UK as well, but do you think that that the problem is the result of failure to put public health interests before profits, just generally in the UK, in the US?
Yeah, I do think in the U.S. there's this thing about commerce and the freedom of choice and a non-preventive way of health, meaning it's more of a let's take care of the problem when it happens versus let's prevent the problem. We don't have universal health care as an example. But what that does mean is that there's less regulation for things that harm us preemptively. It usually comes where something shows significant harm on a population level that has to be proven for causation, that is proven at a risk that warrants the International Agency of Research on Cancer to say it's a probable carcinogen. Like if you think about all the things, that's just how the US is. Like, for example, we've only banned like a dozen chemicals. And that was like 80 years of just like barely a dozen chemicals banned. And we still have formaldehyde in our products. And the FDA did a interest where they said, hey, what do people feel about the formaldehyde? Is this of concern to the people? We're thinking about, putting a ban on it. Nothing has happened. Everybody was like, yes, remove formaldehyde. It is a literal carcinogen. Like, it's used to embalm dead bodies. Yes, remove it. They still haven't.
So it's not a question of the evidence not being strong enough. The case for banning is strong enough.
I believe so, but you can't do a randomized control trial and force people to put formaldehyde and those not. It's kind of like the chicken and the egg, right? Like, we knew that smoking was harmful, but we didn't we didn't restrict it, and there was no warning on the cigarette packs for decades. This was for our industry purposes, like driving anti-labeling. But at the same time, there were people saying, well, there's no randomized control trial, which is the gold standard for epidemiological science, to prove that those who smoke get cancer. It's a cause. As a scientist, I think that's a problem, to rely on this gold standard being randomized control trials, because it is not ethical to force someone to smoke a cigarette and wait till they get cancer. Therefore, it's not ethical to put these chemicals in these products and just wait and see if something bad happens. So it's a really sad system that forces U.S. citizens to be aware. I always say, you do not have to be a chemist. I'm not a chemist. I can't even pronounce some of these like words on these labels. but you do need to be aware. And you can be aware and decide you don't care. It's, just like someone who chooses to say, I know what smoking does, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm not trying to restrict anybody's like function in life and what brings them joy. All I'm saying is in the US, you have to know in order to make your own decision, because our regulatory system is not going to default make it for you.
No, it's not about to change rapidly, is it? Not
No,
anytime soon.
honestly, it's crazy. They created this federal law called the Modernization of the Cosmetic Regulation Act, which we call MOCRA, that is weaker than some state policies.
Well, actually, on this issue of awareness, you've actually done some incredible work in behavioural studies, actually, which is going and looking at how individuals themselves can be empowered. And it goes beyond identifying the problem, but actually looking for those solutions, because that's what, in this whole area, it's so complex. On the one hand, we need to better understand what the causes are, what the impact is. But on the other hand, we also need to find solutions now.
Yes.
And so your specific work was involving working with pregnant mothers in your study. And the project was called Reclaim Our Ancestral Roots, otherwise called RAW, which is totally brilliant. Can you talk to us a bit about this RAW study and also how the cultural context was an important part of it and why it was important for addressing health risk?
Yeah, I think what's important to know is that I trained as a basic bench scientist, worked with snails, mice. I was not trained as a population scientist, but I very much believe in understanding the biological pinnings of disease, the underpinnings of disease in order to make a behavioral change. So I did this study looking at, the age and when Black women or women of color were using these chemical hair products and reported menstruation. And others and I found that the earlier one uses hair oils or certain products, the earlier a child goes through menstruation. So I was lecturing on this in the community of Northern Manhattan in Harlem and New York City, which is in Manhattan. And a lot of young Black women and older Black women came up to me and said, well, what am I supposed to do? And I really didn't have like a very good answer, but I pretty much gave some suggestions. But this kind of question, no matter where I was, came up. Like, what am I supposed to do? You're telling me the science, you're telling me the biology, but you're not telling me how I can impact my health. So because of that, I designed a study for the community based off of the community's desire to know. We started with pregnant women of color who are in the New York City area and the different boroughs. If you don't know New York, there's like the Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens. And so we started with this very diverse, multicultural recruitment strategy. We did it actually during COVID-19. So everything was virtual. That virtual setting it allowed for more people to participate because they didn't have to like come to Columbia. But if you can imagine, pregnant women of color are going through their own very horrendous situations with the COVID-19 pandemic. But we took that into consideration and we gave them a space to just talk about their hair journey from their earliest memory to pregnancy. We provided them with education on what endocrine disruptor chemicals were. We explained to them where they could be found, gave them strategies to choose cleaner products. And because they were about to have a child, we also gave them the information on how the intergenerational impact of this exposure impacts their child, and the biology and the evidence that we have that is an intergenerational harm. And so these are women who are already making a whole lot of changes for the safety of their pregnancy and to have a healthy child. And so my principle wasn't like, I'm telling you what to do. I was just giving the knowledge and the tools. And behaviorally, I just wanted you to be able to make a decision. You can make a decision to act and change your products, reduce your exposure, or you can make the decision not to act, because that's also your priority, your prerogative. But the fact of the matter is, now you know, and you can't make a decision if you don't know.
So you tracked these mothers and their children, and what kind of results were you, and how did you carry out the study, and what were the kind of results that you got from it?
Yeah, so it was a pilot study, and with the pilot, we had about 46 women who we followed from like second, third trimester to 1 month postpartum. And we followed them to look at biological changes. So we took urine samples at repeated time points and looked at their phthalates, because we were really, for this pilot, focusing on, can we reduce phthalates, which are in the personal care products that the women are using. We also asked them about the brands they were using, and we asked them to let us know, did this education promote you to have greater knowledge, help you make a decision, help you maintain that decision? And so what we found is that, in a very diverse sample, for those who received the education, they made a decision. Everyone was like, I have made a decision. I now know what this is. I did not know before. Now I know. I'm going to make a decision to act. And what we found is that what was so incredible is the women who said, I did not know, and I'm going to act, and I've acted for more than a month, it tracked with them decreasing their level of some of the low molecular weight phthalates that we were measuring. And then overall, we found like about 54% of women had reduced their low molecular weight phthalate measures, which is what is in personal care products. And granted, it's not like significantly better than chance, but it just shows you that you can give education, somebody can make a decision, and you can track that decision through their biological measures.
That's utterly incredible, because if we look at, presuming that they would have been exposed to more than phthalates. So chances are, if you were looking for other chemicals, there would have been a reduction in those as well. So it's almost like that reduction in phthalate would be an indicator of what else could be improving.
Exactly. And that's where I thought that it would be a strong intervention, because if you give too much information, people freeze. It's like, what am I supposed to do? Like, you're telling me all of this stuff is in everything. But I said to myself, well, let's just educate them on the science and then give them one thing to target. But the fact of the matter is, once you hear this information, it starts you thinking. And many of the women were like, wait, so I just had my baby shower, and this is the product that I got for my baby. Do I need new products? And it's like, well, we weren't even talking about your baby products. But now you're thinking beyond just you. You're thinking about your family unit. You're thinking about what your child uses. And so if you start with just a small amount of biology and education, and then this is the first step. You create this cascade of, hey, what else is going on in my house? What else is going on in my kitchen? and your ears may be more in tune to different changes you can make without this overwhelming burden of no matter what I do, I'm exposed. And that's what I didn't want.
No, that's amazing, because that is a response that, because we go out and do education talks and we're constantly looking for how we can improve them. And one thing we definitely come across is people being overwhelmed by just too much information. And the way you've just put it there is so clever, because on the one hand, you're helping, people have access to this information in a way that they can digest, that doesn't freak them out, that they feel they can control. But equally, you're going to have the kind of impact, that you're looking for. And targeting mothers and children, obviously there's that window of susceptibility. But is there also another reason, and one, as a group, mothers, let's say, or expectant mothers, or, pregnant women, are they a good group to target because they are more, in your experience, likely to want to make behaviour changes once they're informed?
Yes, I do believe that there are certain groups in sensitive windows that are more likely to make a change because they're already primed. And so pregnant women are automatically primed. Don't dye your hair, don't eat certain fish, don't eat, they're just automatic. Take your prenatals and you just do it, and you just do it. And so they're already in a behavioral space of change. I'm now interested in exploring women who have been diagnosed with early onset breast cancer. So being diagnosed younger than age 45, and asking the question, does the education on the biology and the products and providing you with the tools to change and make a change, if you choose to do so, are you primed to do that? Because now you're in a vulnerable window because this woman has been diagnosed at a younger age. She likely has children who were also young. I'm now asking that question in the next iteration.
That sounds brilliant, because obviously women who've had that diagnosis early onset, I suppose anything that can help them reduce recurrence, anything that can help reduce, any morbidity that comes with that breast cancer risk is brilliant. And maybe the shock of having a diagnosis is sufficient for them to want to be, receptive to information and change. So I suppose, to me, these kinds of results are really give me hope. Do they give you hope that there are ways in which education at the right time, in the right way, can really help achieve the kinds of behaviour changes that will have an impact on people's exposures?
I do, and I'm hoping it has an intergenerational impact. My goal is to always think about the family unit, because the mother is usually the one that's the primary buyer of the cleaning household goods, the personal care products, the food. It's very common that is her role. If in that role you learn that you can avoid certain things because in the US, they're not going to avoid it for you, then you have a better control over how you're also teaching your children. My son during the pandemic was in virtual pre-K, and I had him watch these high school students talk about smoking. And it was this program I run, and they were talking about the dangers of smoking. And he watched and he watched and he watched. And then to this day, he's 10 years old. If he sees someone smoking, he's like, "Mommy, we have to tell them to stop smoking. It's dangerous." And he is very no, smoking is bad. But the thing is, I didn't put that in his head so much as I was doing a program as a person being a sponge. Now that's his image, that's his opinion. And I have to stop him from going up to people and telling them his opinion, because he will tell you, "You're going to die. You can't do
That's scary.
But I think, if we focus on a unit, and we say, this is not about you doing right or wrong. This is really about you having the knowledge to make a choice.
And actually, in your study group, your group 46 women, was it? Yeah. Some didn't make the lifestyle changes and therefore didn't have the results by the sounds of it. And what was some of the barriers to them? Because they presumably had access to the same information. What was it for them? Did you identify any barriers to them taking action?
Yeah, so some of the barriers that you can imagine are people are very stuck on their product once they have a product that they really like. So some women were like, I pick my products by smell. If that product smells good, then I'm using it. And that means that it has phthalates. So that's a hard sell to tell them, no, you want an unscented product. The other barrier was that some women were not the primary purchaser in the home, and they lived in a large family. And this is common in New York. You live with your family. And so they were like, I just pick up whatever somebody bought that's in the shower. And so if they aren't the main purchaser, then they may not be the person that's the one to talk to make those decisions. And then the other barrier that I found was that it was the pandemic. And women of color are more likely in the United States to have greater morbidity in pregnancy and post-pregnancy. They're more likely to have preterm births. And we found that. We found that many of our women went into labor early. We found that some of the women, one had a child that was not released from the hospital after birth. We found that some families had experienced a COVID death, and they were dealing with that. So why it's so important to meet people where they are and not be so obsessed with, did you change, is that this was also a very personable. We sent cards to, congratulations for your baby's birth, happy birthday. We sent condolences. We called to stop asking, can you complete this questionnaire? And just called how are you? Because this was done in Spanish, it was done in English, it was during COVID. You have to acknowledge that your result is not their life.
No. No, and I think it's incredible the way you describe the amount of kind of personalization, right? So as you say, the phone calls, the making those women feel like they're an individual and they're being dealt with as a human in their own individual circumstance. So this was a fairly targeted, small-scale study, which would have taken a lot of effort, a lot of resourcing. But how could we scale something like that up and have similar kind of results, particularly what you've described around that personalized approach?
Well, I think if we talk about pregnant women, the fact of the matter is they're integrated into the healthcare system because they're being seen for prenatal visits. And there's a period of time where they're being seen every single week. There's that time where they have to take the glucose test. There's periods where you're just waiting. I think in those times, if we as a society could say we want to be preventive, and if we're talking about avoid mercury, don't eat lunch meat, then we can say, hey, let me tell you about endocrine disruptor chemicals. It could be a pamphlet. It could be a video that they watch. It could be a quick nurse practitioner or someone saying, are you aware of this? Let's avoid this. I think that it can be integrated, and that's why it could scale up because they're already in the system. And they're primed for change. And so that was one of the things that I found very compelling And also the fact that every woman after a pregnancy has this transient increased risk of developing breast cancer. So after every pregnancy, especially since women are having children a little later of age, that transientness is not transient. It can last 10, 20 years to the point where you're now at risk for postmenopausal breast cancer. So if you're telling, and that's why I got into this, I had my child at a later age and I realized I was in a critical window of susceptibility. I had this increased risk of breast cancer and I had to be there for my child. Like I wanted to survive.
Want to be around, yeah.
So I made changes. And so I guess in my mind, it can be integrated into a medical system. Nobody even talked to me about my increased risk after having a child.
No, yeah. So that's a whole other story, isn't it? Informing, educating, working with, health professionals who are kind of able to take advantage of those teachable moments that can happen within a pregnant woman's journey through the health system. But, women encounter the health system in lots of routine ways. So there's so many opportunities, aren't there? And I suppose the one thing that would be really helpful for our listeners and for us as well is if, we've talked a lot about some of the changes that you've been able to share with people in your education interventions. Can you give us maybe a couple of examples of some small achievable steps that might help us to reduce exposure?
Yeah, so I say, everyone has a beauty routine. Most people put on deodorant. Most people do lotion. Some people do leave-in conditioner. Pick that one thing that you do as a routine, that you do every day that stays on your body, and change that one thing. Check it, see if it's safe. You can use different apps. You can use EWG. You can use Detox Me. There's many different apps you can use, and you don't need to be a chemist. If you don't want to download anything to find like what is safe, the fewer ingredients something has is also an indication. If it has a lot of ingredients and you don't understand the names, then likely it's chemically laden. Another thing I say is, okay, you aren't able to just change that particular part of your routine. Like you love your mascara. All right, that's fine. Keep your mascara. What else is there? Just go down the line. The other thing is in your kitchen, if you have black plastic utensils that you use for frying, stirring, anything hot, throw them away. Just throw them away. And you can order wood utensils like teak wood or bamboo or something of that nature. And it's like definitely safer. Now, you probably have to hand wash them. I will tell you, I've decided I don't do hand washing, so I do throw them in the washing machine. But that's my lifestyle. So, I have to accommodate, like, what am I willing? Yes, I'm going to have to buy these wooden utensils sooner than others who wash them by hand, but I'm okay with that. And realize that if you don't need to smell, your clothes don't need to smell like a mountain breeze. It's not necessary, because if you put those things into your dryer, into your washer, that's pretty much all your clothes sitting on you and you're inhaling it. If you have a child that likes to put stuff in their mouth, they're eating it, and nobody is going to judge you if your clothes don't make you do this, like that commercial. Like, it's okay. It's completely okay. But yeah, so those are kind of like my little tips, start small.
That's brilliant. And as you say, they're all achievable. And it's this idea as well that, you know, if you're really attached to a certain part of your routine, find another part that you're a bit less attached to.
Yeah.
Because all those little changes can make a difference. And then, you know, maybe over time you can move to that thing that you're attached to. You'll become less attached to them. That's brilliant advice. We are coming to that part of our chat where we like to ask you a question that we ask all of our guests. And that's, what is your biggest guilty pleasure?
Oh, my 10-year-old son will tell you every day it's a Snickers bar. Oh, I don't eat any candy. You can put a Musketeers, you can put an Almond Joy, you can put any. Even when I was a kid and we went trick-or-treating, the only candy I ate was a Snickers. And I had to bargain with my sister every year to get all of her Snickers. So, and for my birthday this year, my son created his own recipe and melted Snicker bars to make me a Snicker, like, top layer cake. So that's my only weakness. Like, when it comes to, I cannot not eat a Snickers.
You've got to have that guilty pleasure, and it's amazing how often people talk about chocolate as being one of their guilty pleasures. It certainly is mine. Some form of chocolate, anyway. Now, also, what our listeners like to know is what our guests have as recommendations. So do you have any, say, podcast or book or a film that's inspired you that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, so I am a big Audible listener. It helps me fall asleep. It helps me decompress. One podcast that I and my son have been listening to is Myths and Legends. And it's pretty much like lessons from across the globe, stories that you know, stories that you think you know, but have a little twist. So it goes everything from yokai to Norse mythology. So we definitely love that. And then I also, odd, but Voltaire has these 2 books that I find very inspiring. One is called Candide, which means optimism. It's hilarious, and it's also very eye-opening. And the other one I love is called Micromegas, and that one is my favorite.
Wow. Wonderful. Yes, that's a very high culture to be recommending to people.
And I just listen to it when you're falling asleep.
Yeah.
There's
Okay, yeah. I'll give that a go. Fabulous. So tell us a bit about what's on the books for you. So, you're obviously at Columbia University. What are your plans for the future? Any studies that you're working on that you want to share with us?
Yeah, so I really I'm intentionally going into this space of women who've been diagnosed with young age and who have young children, and really thoughtfully trying to create a study to help them take control and reduce their exposures. It's a sensitive period of time. However, I think that it may be an uplifting study as well, giving a woman the ability to have control over something when there is such little control. When someone's being diagnosed young, you're often being told, like, this is what we're doing. And it's just such a fast period of time. So giving them something to hold on to. And then I also really I love to educate. And I'd like to move into, personalizing this education. And if people really want to know, like, what am I supposed to do in my kitchen? Or how am I supposed to change my beauty routine? I'd love to give that feedback. I'd love to tailor that such that it's affordable, convenient, and sustainable. So to just help people, find the safety in a very toxic space.
That's total music to our ears. We'll need to keep talking about that, because that's an area we're very keen on as well, is that kind of accessible education, achievable, and personalised, because everybody's different, So That's brilliant. Where can we find out more about you? Where can our listeners find out about you and your work?
Well, I'm definitely on LinkedIn. So if you ever want to contact me for any reason, please contact me on LinkedIn. If you Google my name, Jasmine McDonald, Columbia University, you'll get my email address. But I'm always happy to talk, always happy. It doesn't matter, nonprofit, corporate. I just believe that the more people have the information, then they can make a choice. Without that, then we're just hoping that the government does what's best for us. And in the U.S., that is not what we are always comfortable with.
Well, look, you're right, but your work is so good and so inspiring. I think there is so much that we can achieve by giving people agency through work such as yours. So thank you so much for spending this time with me. It's been totally fascinating. There's so much we could keep talking about, but we've already covered quite a bit, and it's just really, really, really valuable. Thank you, Jasmine.
Well, no, thank you. And if your listeners have questions, just send them to me and I will type them out for you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Be Well podcast, brought to you by Breast Cancer UK, a prevention charity supporting people to build healthy, lifelong habits and reduce their risk of developing breast cancer. You can start your personal prevention journey right now by taking our prevention quiz. Just click on the link in the show notes.